Hi friends, welcome to JCT TV. This is Bible teaching for the 21st century. So we are slowly but surely working our way through the book of Matthew, and we're in chapter 10 right now of Matthew, and we're right in the middle of Jesus' instructions to his disciples about going out into the world with the message of the kingdom of heaven. Last time we looked at some of the difficulty that Jesus warns them that they will face, and there's more difficulty that we're going to discuss this time as we continue in Matthew chapter 10. So hang in there, we'll be back right after this.
Remote and rural, these children and their families have no access to medical care. There is no clinic nearby. And when a mother is desperate to save her dying child, she will walk for many hours. Sometimes the child doesn't survive. So we go to them. These tables and chairs under the trees look like a gathering, not a medical clinic. But the doctors and nurses are transforming the lives of the children and their families. They provide primary medical care, classes on sanitation, medicines, and a better understanding of HIV and AIDS. Most of all, they bring hope as they diagnose, treat, and educate families. This clinic is a gift from donors that will transform their lives. You can become part of that transformation. Your gift of $25 will provide health care for an entire family. $100 provides care for 6 families. Be a part of real change. Go to wowmission.ca/saveachild.
I just want to make a comment about what we studied last time, just because I didn't make it then. When Jesus is sending his disciples out, he says, you will be hated. Hated. I'm just trying to get rid of this one. Anyway, you'll be hated by all for my name's sake. You know, it's interesting. In the 2nd century, the Christians in the Roman Empire were referred to as haters of mankind. Did you know that? They were not seen as the great, loving, community of believers who are out there doing social justice and caring for the poor. They were seen as haters of mankind. Now, it wasn't a proper description, but that's how they were seen. And so in many ways, they fulfilled what Jesus was saying. All right, let's carry on with verse 24. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It's not enough for a disciple that he be like his teacher, a servant be like his master. If they've called the master of the house Beelzebub, which is another word for Satan, how much more will they call those of his household? Therefore, do not fear them, for there's nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. What Jesus is saying here is that the persecution that you fellas will endure will reflect the persecution that I am and will endure. I am enduring and will endure. And interestingly, even crucifixion. Peter was crucified in Rome, and tradition tells us he insisted on being crucified upside down because he didn't feel that he was worthy of being crucified in the same posture as Jesus had been. If they call me Satan, Jesus is saying, what are they going to call you? Sons of Satan? Chances are that that's exactly what they'll call you. But the disciples are not to fear men, but to boldly proclaim the kingdom of heaven from the rooftops. Often we don't do things because we're afraid that we're going to get hurt, rejected, both. We all like to be liked. We don't like to be marginalized. We don't like to be misrepresented or seen as a bad person, even while we're trying to present the goodness of God to people. We're afraid. C.S. Lewis made a very interesting point in his book, Mere Christianity. Fear God, fear nothing else. How's that? When you think about it, it's profound. I mean, how many of us are paralyzed by fear. And think about it. Fear paralyzes us. We may not be totally paralyzed, but in terms of something we want to do, but then we think about the worst case scenario. In thinking about the worst case scenario, thinking about what might happen when we choose to do this thing, we choose not to do this thing in order that the worst case scenario will not come to pass. So in that sense, we're paralyzed. Fear paralyzes us. I ride a motorcycle, and I'm not for a minute promoting motorcycles as the norm, but one of the most common things I hear from people is, well, aren't motorcycles dangerous? I said, well, sure they are. Life is dangerous. Right? I could be sitting here right now talking to you and have an aneurysm. Be gone like that. Heart attack. Life is dangerous. Yes, a motorcycle's dangerous. So is life. Now, I'm not being flippant here. I'm just trying to make a point. Because life is dangerous, am I going to roll up into a fetal position under the covers in a darkened room and never see the light of day? No. I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to take the chance that I can embrace life, at least for today, right? You take the chance. Well, whether it's riding a motorcycle or riding a bicycle, or whether it's, going on some wilderness trek through the mountains where you might have to deal with inclement weather and maybe wild animals, if you yield to the fear of the worst case scenario, then you'll never do that trek through the mountains. You'll never ride that motorcycle. You'll never get married. I've had young people say to me, well, marriage is really fallen into disrepute these days. Hardly anybody stays married. Marriage is always ending up in divorce. Much better, I shouldn't marry. Well, okay, if that's how you want to look at it, and just bow to the worst case scenario, you're paralyzed. Fear God, fear nothing else. Jesus is saying to the disciples, don't be afraid of men. Be afraid of God. Understand that you're doing the Lord's work, and if the Lord has asked you and called you and commanded you to do something, you're accountable to Him, not to these people who come and go, who give you trouble because your message is countercultural. It's a good word. Now, whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light. What you hear in the ear, preach on the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. But rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Who's that? Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? Not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. The very hairs of your head are numbered. Do not fear, therefore. Do not fear. Do not fear. You are of more value than many sparrows. The disciples are of great value. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. If you're going to say to your world, I'm committed to Jesus, when the day comes, as it will come, when you stand before your Creator to give account, Jesus will say, I know him, I know her, I stand for them. This is the quid pro quo that Jesus is talking about here. Whoever denies me before men, him I'll also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Don't think I've come to bring peace. I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come, now, if you've not read this before, just kind of hunker down here. I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be those of his own household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. He who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. He who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. Whoa. Undoubtedly, there had been discussion, if not conflict, in the homes of the disciples themselves over Jesus. Had Zebedee endorsed his 2 sons' abandonment of their fishing nets? Zebedee was an older man. Pulling in a fishing net is huge work. Previously, he had James and John to help him. Now he's got to do it on his own because they're following that guy who has no home, that homeless itinerant preacher named Jesus of Nazareth? Did the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law in Peter's house get along? Did they approve Peter's delinquency? Peter was the main breadwinner there in his home in Capernaum, right on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And he's out for weeks at a time following Jesus around. Did his wife, did his mother-in-law approve of this? What about Jesus and his own family? His brothers and sisters didn't believe in him. Now later, they came around, and we know that James, his half-brother, became the leader of the church in Jerusalem and wrote this marvelous book in the New Testament called the Book of James. But there was real discord and dysfunction in Jesus' own family. If you don't carry your cross, you're not worthy of me. Crosses were quite commonly seen in Jesus' time. This is how the Romans killed zealots who were trying to mount rebellion against the Roman occupation power. So it's a common thing to see criminals carrying crosses. Usually it would be the cross piece they'd be carrying on their shoulders. The vertical piece would already be in the ground or be lying there ready to go in the ground, and they would take him to this thing and, hammer the two pieces together and hammer him onto it. Crucifixion was very common in those days. And he's saying, look, you disciples, you're going to carry a cross. With some kind of spiritual or psychological facsimile, you're going to suffer for the kingdom of heaven, and chances are you're going to die. You're going to lose the comforts on this earth. So little wonder friends and relatives, and some of those of your nuclear, let alone your extended family, are going to be totally offended by what you're doing, are going to misunderstand what you're doing, are going to be angry at what you're doing, who are going to, in some cases, disown you for what you're doing. Can you bear up under that kind of pressure? Obviously, the overriding factor here in bearing up is their profound love for Jesus, the Son of God. He's not saying for a minute you shouldn't love your father, your mother, your kids. He's not saying you shouldn't love them. In fact, he'll make the point later in Matthew with regard to the Pharisees, who are supposed to be caring for the parents by Jewish law, but their way of getting around caring for their parents is by taking the money they should be paying to care for their parents and giving it as a gift at the temple and calling it korban, gift. And Jesus says to the disciples, to the Pharisees, you're using a flaw in the law, if you will, by saying that the gift to God takes super, value and trumps your obligation to your parents. You're supposed to love your parents. If you don't love your parents, you're worse than an infidel. So here, Jesus is not saying you shouldn't love them. What he's saying is you must commit to a greater love, a prior love, and that prior love is love for God and his kingdom. And what that will do for you, it will have you loving your husband more. It will have you loving your wife more, loving your kids more than you would have done in a natural sense. So don't let this passage offend you. One old theologian one time said, our life as believers is the drama of two worlds. It's really true. We are here in space and time, and we have all the demands of space and time, all the relational dynamics, the functions, the dysfunctions, all of those things. And in many cases, they can command all of our energy and all of our interest. What Jesus is saying is, make sure you seek first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, and all these other things, including your valued loved one relationships, will be added unto you. In fact, I think I can go so far as to say that if you love God first, you will love and be loved by your children. I haven't seen a kid yet who's truly loved by his parents who doesn't love them back. Yes, I've seen kids rebel for a period of time, but I always see kids who come back. Love has that irresistible magnetism about it. And that kid who rebels, runs into trouble out there in the world, gives his head a shake, thinks back to the unfailing love of his parents, and realizes that's where I should be. It's almost as though you have a homing instinct. It's like a migratory urge back to where you've been loved. And when you love friends, you're able to love. For those who can't love in our world, in most cases they haven't been loved. Love begets love, unlove begets unlove. That's kind of the way it works. Attach yourself to Jesus. Become a kingdom person. Become a child of the kingdom, and you will bear children of the kingdom. That's sort of how it works. He who finds his life will lose it. He who loses his life for my sake will find it. In other words, make me the priority, Jesus is saying, and all of your other valuable priority relationships will fall into place. Remember, it works both ways, so that he who receives you into his home with hospitality is receiving me, Jesus is saying. He who receives me receives him who sent me. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. He who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. Whoever gives one of these little ones only a cup of cold water in the name of a disciple, surely I say to you, he shall by no means lose his reward. What's the point? He's saying, look, when you help, you are helped. There's this reciprocal law in the universe. And there's another thing. A Jewish rule in Jesus' day, quote from Jewish writing, a man's emissary is like the man himself. So, you accept a responsibility or you accept an emissary, someone in the name of Jesus, it's like you're accepting Jesus himself. Really, you read this and you realize that Jesus is basically putting himself on our side. You say, yeah, I'm demanding a cross. I'm demanding prior consideration. I'm suggesting that you may find yourself marginalized, even dislocated by the culture in the short term. But you need to know in the long term, because you're made for the heavenlies, that when you stand before your Father who is in heaven, where your life really begins, that's when I will truly kick into gear for you. I will defend you before your Father who is in heaven, and I will make sure that you hear him say, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of thy Lord. It's good stuff. That's why reading the Bible's so great. Be back right after this.
Very few African mothers ever see a doctor or midwife, yet each mother knows how fragile her child's life is. You see, 26,000 children under the age of 5 will die today because they don't have access to medical care. Your gift of $260, just $22 every month, helps stock a mobile clinic and train healthcare workers to care for young mothers and their children during pregnancy and preschool years. Join WOW Mother Care now. Protect the life of a mother and her child.
The work of the Word of God is stunningly remarkable. We must understand that God has placed His life codes of salvation and healing in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jim Cantelon is focused on the messages that God has communicated through the Bible to you and me. Today, it's more important for us now that we learn what God is saying to us. God has placed us here now to be examples and to share the good news of His work with the world today. If you've heard the Divine Mind speak to you through this program, then God has worked in amazing ways to reveal His Word. Remember that this program has cost, and we have been faithful to God to bring this program to you. If you want to give an offering in any amount, we would appreciate it. Send to Jim Cantelon today, P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R3Y7. Or call us at 519-415-8341. Or simply visit jimcantelontoday.com.
I want to go back to verse 39 for a few minutes, where Jesus says, he who finds his life will lose it. He who loses his life for my sake will find it. This was a technique that Jesus used in his teaching, kind of presenting one side of the coin, other side of the coin. I forget what the literary device is for that method of teaching, but if you're going to find your life, you got to lose it. If you're going to lose your life, you got to find. What's he talking about here? He's talking about putting him first and allowing the call, if you will, of the Spirit of God in your life to trump whatever call your teachers, your parents, or influences in your life may have invested in you, in good faith. I remember when I was a kid growing up, many well-meaning teacher suggesting to me, because I had certain talents in various areas of communication, that I should think about politics, or I should think about teaching, or I should think about public relations, okay, because they felt that I had a certain skill set in terms of English literature and English composition and verbal communication that would, see me doing well in those areas. And, I'm just a kid, and I'm listening, thinking, well, that sounds interesting. I'm not sure what that means, but so I started thinking about those things. And then I thought about other things. I had other teachers telling me because I had a certain intelligence quotient, I should be thinking about going along, this stream in university or that stream, taking this profession, that profession. And, when you're in grade 8, grade 9, you've got the whole world ahead of you, the whole life ahead of you, and you consider these options. Nobody suggested that I should ever consider anything but upward mobility. And in our world, that's what it's all about, upward mobility, right? Do better and better, more and more money, more and more status, more and more material goods, more and more this, more and more that, grow, grow, grow. There's all kinds of books written about it, seminars being taught, billions of dollars being spent every year with self-help materials and professional seminars and, everything geared to upward mobility. Jesus is talking here about downward mobility. He's talking about serving rather than ruling people. He himself is the most profound example of this, in that we looked at this a couple of studies ago. He emptied himself. He descended. He didn't ascend. He descended to our condition. I come from a long line of preacher pastors. My family had been in the ministry since 1913. So all my uncles, my grandfather, my own dad, of course, all great uncles, all in the ministry. All basically church planters, missionaries, evangelists. And so growing up, whenever all the family members were together, I would sit as a little kid and listen to these guys tell their stories. They were all great communicators, a lot of Irish blood in them. And most entertaining hours I've spent in my life listening to these guys talking about their adventures in going across the Canadian prairies, going across Europe, planting churches, and creating whole movements, if you will, for the work of the Lord. In every case, there was a common theme: giving up stuff, giving up a home, giving up a salary, giving up, even from time to time for those who were itinerant evangelists, family time. Giving up, giving up, giving up. And they would start something, get it strong, pass it on to someone else, and then go back and start over again. Downwardly mobile instead of upwardly mobile. It wasn't their interest to create the biggest church in North America and pastor it till they turned 90 years of age. It was their interest to get the DNA right, get it strong, train other people, allow them to move into it, and for them to basically retreat and start over again in another situation. I guess you might say they were trailblazers, they were pioneers. But it's the principle here. You want to find your life? You got to lose it. If you're going to hang on to stuff, stuff will hang on to you. Much better to be free. That doesn't mean you got to all be pioneers, you got to all be trailblazers. No. There's a bigger principle here. What Jesus is saying is that the real valuable things in life are the things that do not attach themselves to life, but they are the aspirational, big horizon, kingdom of heaven things. That's where your upward mobility should exist. But even in that pursuit, you're going to find yourself dominantly mobile, because the Lord will not have you ruling yet, He will have you serving. Following Jesus' example, emptying Himself of His entitlements, and if there's a word that is characteristic of our world today, it's entitlement. Reducing yourself, losing your life in order to find it.
Cantelon's Casual Commentary, a companion guide as you study the Gospel of Matthew, along with your host, Jim Cantelon. There is so much in Scripture that can't be covered in a half-hour program. What is the context for this story? What were the Jewish traditions at the time? What is the Hebrew meaning of the word? Jim decided to share some of his research with you in a series of compact booklets that soon will be a book. We'd like you to have a copy of Cantelon's Casual Commentary, edition number 1. Place your order with a meaningful gift and help us build this ministry. You may wish to become a monthly partner when you place your order. Phone 519-415-8341 or write Jim Cantelon today, Post Office Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R3Y7, or go to jimcantelontoday.com. Ask for Cantelon's Casual Commentary and state the amount of your gift.
You know, that word from C.S. Lewis is a good word, huh? Fear God, fear nothing else. The Bible says the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. It just simply means be aware of your accountability. Understand He's your creator, He's your Father, and one day you will give account. When you got that straight, everything else kind of falls into place. For one thing, it's great living a life free of fear. Thanks for watching. I'm Jim Cantelon. See you next time.
Contact us. Jim Cantelon today. P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 3Y7. If you're sending a check, make it payable to Jim Cantelon today. Or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com and click Support.